In fact, Greenland is not green at all, with 85% of its territory covered by ice. The Viking Eric the Red gave it this name in the late 10th century, when he arrived there to serve a sentence, hoping that calling it Greenland would entice others to join him. It is the world's largest island, but also one of the least populated places on Earth. Currently, it has nearly 57,000 inhabitants, with 16,000 living in the capital, Nuuk. About 88% of the population are Inuit, Greenland's indigenous people. Outside of settlements, there are no roads or mobile phone coverage. The main modes of transportation are by water and air, as well as snowmobiles and even dog sleds. Throughout history, Greenland has alternated between Danish and Norwegian control, until the International Court in The Hague ruled in 1933 that Denmark had full rights to the territory. In 1943, the United States established an air force base there, and after World War II, it offered to buy the island from Denmark for $1,100,000, but the offer was rejected. In 1953, Greenland was constitutionally declared part of Denmark, with self-governing rights and its own representatives in the Danish parliament. Since 2009, Greenland has gained full control over its natural resource extraction and partial control over foreign affairs. Discussions about complete independence from Denmark have intensified, with 84% of Greenlanders supporting independence in surveys. However, full independence will pose serious economic and security challenges, as Greenland relies on Danish subsidies of approximately €500 million per year. The island has vast reserves of natural resources, including oil and gas. Climate change could open new Arctic shipping routes, further increasing Greenland's strategic importance. In 2019, Donald Trump expressed interest in purchasing Greenland, but Denmark rejected the idea. Now, 6 years later, Trump has raised the issue again, even hinting at the use of force. To better understand Greenland's situation, a panel discussion with experts was held at the University of Cambridge's Centre for Geopolitics.
So I think over the past few weeks we've had quite a lot of these sorts of statements in terms of American foreign policy from the new president that are almost unthinkable. They previously were unthinkable, and that's why you do wonder whether having to see them as part of seeing them together is part of the answer here. So how much is this really about Greenland, and how much is it about trying to reconfigure the world? Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen, but if Ukraine and also, I suppose, potentially Israel, Gaza is settled in a certain way that's been proposed, that makes it very, that's quite unprecedented for post-1945 geopolitics, I think.
The use of force by the US would be a major issue with NATO.
If one of the main allies were to really take by force the land of another ally, and it would really raise big questions, because Article 5 could not be applied, because it would be from within. In fact, it's the end of the NATO alliance, and thereby also one of the signals that it would be definitely the end of the world order as we have known it since 1945, and also since the Helsinki Final Act and since the end of the Cold War. In fact, since that period, 45 to 2022, when Russia started the war of aggression on Ukraine. Rather than maybe expanding those capabilities that are there in conjunction with Denmark, Trump actually challenged Denmark's position vis-à-vis Greenland, and therefore an ally, a smaller ally inside NATO. At the same time, when Trump is challenging the allies also over supporting Ukraine against Russia.
Concerns were raised about Trump's unpredictable foreign policy, but it is clear that US interest in Greenland extends beyond his presidency and remains a long-term strategic priority. Greenland does not have its own military. Experts suggest that in future, Greenland may establish a coast guard rather than a traditional military force.
To echo that, the big question is, are those
The relationship between Greenlanders and Danes is quite complex, as Greenlanders themselves consider Danes to be colonizers. Sara Alsvik, a Greenlandic politician who participated in the discussion remotely, emphasized that there is no such thing as a better colonizer.
The two governments have agreed to work on looking back at the consequences of colonization, not just up until 1953, which is the formal end of colonialism or the colonial era, but also what happened after 53, where much more massive policies, colonial policies, created a systemic discrimination of Inuit and Greenlanders in Greenland and in Denmark, and what those policies and that systemic discrimination has of legacies within the current systems, both here in Greenland and in Denmark. There's a specific one related to the IUD program, which I'm sure you've heard of, which is a very, very, very serious matter, where a program decided basically by the government in Denmark resulted in half of the women and girls in a childbearing age being fitted with IUDs.
In many cases, actions were taken without the consent of the women themselves or the parents of underage girls, which is why last year a group of Inuit women initiated legal action against Denmark.
It very clearly is an example of a deliberate policy from Denmark after the formal colonial era.
This hasn't changed.
The fact that Greenlanders still see Danes as colonizers was also confirmed by a Norwegian student who had worked in Greenland for a short time.
Greenlanders, so we are often used to talk about the Greenlanders as like an Inuit people, which is the case, right? But most Greenlanders are a mix kind of like between the native Greenlandic population, Danish, Norwegian, Faroese, Icelandic people who have migrated to Greenland as well. And I think that the average perception in Greenland is, generally speaking, negative towards the Danes, but it's more complicated than saying that there is a sort of like maliciousness to it. I think most Greenlanders acknowledge the fact that they're a Nordic country and they have ties to both Denmark and all the other Scandinavian countries, and there are also familiar ties, cultural ties, economic ties. But on the whole, I would say that it's kind of a skepticism towards Denmark because of what they consider perceived injustices. The Greenlandic culture it's a kinship culture, it's a familial culture. They value family and they value the close-knit connections that they have in their small local societies. Keep in mind that the Greenlandic villages, they're not connected by road or anything, right? So you have to travel by airplane or boat if you want to go from one village to another. And I think that results in a really close-knit society where everyone looks out for each other and everyone has an interest in how people are doing, basically. And even for me as a non-Greenlander, as a Norwegian traveling to Greenland, I also experience this kind of warmth in the Greenlandic culture, which I really appreciate.
A YouGov survey from January this year found that 78% Danes would not support selling Greenland to the US, while 72% believe the decision should be made by Greenlanders themselves. However, if Trump were to seriously pursue the purchase of Greenland, it remains unclear who the actual seller would be, Denmark or Greenland.